Hello, I'm Christina Brown. This is Our Take on Arise TV. And joining me today as my guest co-host is Hillary Crosley. She is a journalist, New York bureau chief for Washington Post digital magazine, The Root, and founder of the editorial director, or rather founder and editorial director of Parlor Magazine.
I'm every woman.
Yes, you are. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
For people that are not as familiar with your pieces, with some of your articles, what would you consider your beat, the types of stories that you like to cover?
The great thing about The Root is we cover race, politics, and culture. So that allows me to reign over a number of subjects. And so right now we're doing a Black patriotism series, which is interesting, right? Because what does America mean to Black people? I read a book not too long ago and by a comedian, and he said, you know what, I'm Black. Like, I'm a Black American. Like, I'm not going back to Africa. Like, there's no place that would be my home. Like, I'm American.
Right.
And you really sort of think about it, and you're like, you know what, actually, you're right.
So Black patriotism, does that mean that you identify yourself as African American? You identify yourself simply as Black American? What's the defining line between someone who considers themselves a Black patriot and someone who doesn't?
That's the question. That's the real direction of that series, sort of getting Black people's perspective on what that would mean to you in the guise, through the lens, rather, of all the things that we'll be talking about today, from Trayvon to, the affirmative action stuff, military, all of those things, and what it really means, and that's why it's so interesting.
You mentioned Trayvon, and we are going to speak extensively about George Zimmerman's trial, and to actually help kick off today's Daily Take segment is Edward Wyckoff Williams, who is a political analyst and contributing editor to The Root. It's like the Root reunion here.
Yes,
We've got The Root in the house. Thank you so much,
Always
Edward.
a pleasure.
You are certainly no stranger to Arise, joining Debbie Turner-Bell on Arise America with very insightful analysis. You've developed a relationship, a rapport with Trayvon's father,
yes.
Tracy
and
Martin.
the entire family, and a relationship with Ben Crump, the family attorney. And so I had the opportunity to do an exclusive Father's Day interview with Tracy Martin, which I thought was really important because the trial actually started on June 10th. And Father's Day was just a week later, on the 16th. And so The Root ran that exclusive interview with the father, where he humanized his son so beautifully and basically talked about this boy that he loved and how he used to love working with his hands, and how he could take things apart and put them back together, whether it was a bike or a motorcycle. And I think that was a wonderful sort of way to frame a son that a father loved, as opposed to the way that Mark O'Mara and the Zimmerman defense team have been trying to use sort of old racial codes to frame Trayvon as a thug that was the agent of his own demise. And so hearing the words of his father and how he said, I thought my son was perfect. I mean, he reminisced about his son in such a beautiful way that African-American boys are hardly ever discussed about or talked about or framed in that, or regarded in that way.
And I think the other thing that's really fascinating about your piece is the fact that it reminds us clearly that Trayvon is not this poster child for the racial tensions that this case has brought to the forefront.
Yes.
He is, he is the son of Sabrina Fulton. He is the son of Tracy Martin. But for so many of us, he represents years, generations of injustice that some people would like to believe no longer exists.
Yes. And I think it's partly because, one, he is a child. We talk about Black males so much and sort of group Black boys in with Black men. And I think a part of the problem with what occurred on that night is that Zimmerman thought that he was approaching a man, right? And the way that most white people see children, in this country at least, Black children, is almost like they're Black adults. They don't ever get the deference and respect and presumption of innocence that white children get. And so we do bring that history to bear, because we as Black people, Black mothers or Black sisters and brothers and cousins and friends, we understand our own humanity. We embrace that. We celebrate that. But it's time for that to be respected on an international stage. And I think this is a small microcosm of how that can begin to happen. woman.
And Edward and Hillary, of course, the Arise networks have been continuing nonstop coverage of the killing of Trayvon Martin, the trial of George Zimmerman, with the latest from the Florida courtroom where Zimmerman faces second-degree murder charges. It is now day 3 of the trial, and Judge Deborah Nelson ruled this morning that jurors could and should hear telephone calls that Zimmerman made to cops in the months prior to the shooting death of unarmed Trayvon Martin. This is a huge, huge victory, really, for prosecutors. And we saw yesterday that the jury got to see these graphic photos of Trayvon. His father walked out of the courtroom.
Yes,
Have you had any continued dialogue?
I talked to him about that. And you know, because when I interviewed the mother a couple of months ago, I actually asked whether or not she felt that it would be useful to release photos of Trayvon, even though I knew that was a very difficult question to ask her. But we talked through it with Ben Crump, and Ben Crump was actually almost very aggressive on the point, thinking that the way that Emmett Till's mother released those photos of her broken son, her son's broken body, really helped to spawn an awareness about the cruelties that were going on in the Jim Crow South. Because a lot of people were just blinded to it, because without the images on the cover of magazines and newspapers, you don't get a real sense of what occurred. And the mother said that she wasn't sure how she felt. The father was very adamant that he didn't want that out there because he didn't want his son's body to become sort of almost sort of like a graphic image, right? He would much rather remember his son the way that he was. But I think for purposes of the prosecution, it's necessary. And it's necessary to see that this was a skinny little boy who got, you know, taunted in the dark by a grown man with a gun. What was interesting yesterday, though, is that the first responders testified. And one of the things that came out was that Zimmerman's account of what occurred actually was inconsistent with the first responders account, and we'll get to that, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're definitely going to get back to that because I want to spend more time discussing this case and the relationship with the family with you, Edward. Thank you so much for that insight, though. But now we're going to continue our discussion with Edward Wyckoff Williams, like I just said, a little later in the show. But the difference is we're actually going to hear from these infamous 911 tapes, so you definitely want to stick around so that we can listen to that. Moving on, another big ruling yesterday, this one coming from the Supreme Court. Gay people in America, now recognized as being married by a particular state, cannot be kept from receiving the benefits of marriage conveyed through federal law. Of course, I'm talking about DOMA, which had specified that marriage can only take place between a man and a woman. However, in another ruling on a related gay marriage issue, the justices determined that the second case should be directed to the Court of Appeals in California. Of course, I'm talking about Prop 8. Therefore, they were not going to take a position about whether California could pass a law banning gay marriage. This almost seems like another punt, right, from the Supreme Court. We saw that in the affirmative action case a couple days ago. And we're seeing it now with regards to Prop 8, but still a very huge, huge victory for gay rights advocates with regards to DOMA.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, my cousin just married her wife on Saturday, so in California. Yeah, shout out to you, Shalon. So obviously, I believe in gay marriage. I really think that people have made it more of a spiritual conversation than it should be. At the end of the day, yes, it's about love, but it's about rights. Like if somebody dies, I want to be able to get, you know, money that should come to me as a spouse. If we have a child, I don't need the other person's family saying you have no right to raise this person because they're not actually related to you. That's what this is really about. And I think when people stop trying to evangelize the religious aspects of marriage, especially in a country like America where, you know, getting divorced is like getting some Skittles at the store. Like, people need to really pay attention to what is at the heart of the matter. And
President Obama echoed that in his response this morning, because he talked about the fact that the court decision doesn't infringe upon people's religious rights, and they have the right to believe whatever they want to believe. But this is a civil rights issue, and is a civil rights issue under the Equal Protection Clause of the U.S. Constitution. Everyone should be treated equally. And so I think that Hillary makes a really brilliant point about that, because this is really a basic human right. that we saw articulated by the court best, I think, in the Loving v. Virginia case from 1967, where they struck down miscegenation laws, saying that blacks and whites could not be married. And I believe in the majority opinion, the justices said that this is the most fundamental right to human life, that you can choose who you love. And so I think that's what we're experiencing today.
But it doesn't really settle the debate, because we still have the Prop 8 issue out of California, which means it's still on the table. And it certainly also means that it's going to be a long time before we get a final ruling.
Not necessarily, because interestingly enough, the Prop 8 decision wasn't sent back to the courts there. The court had actually made its final decision. So the federal court has decided that Proposition 8 was unconstitutional. And so right now, from this moment, gays can be married in the state of California. What's at issue is that the U.S. Supreme Court has been very much going along the path of states' rights. And that's a part of what we saw yesterday with the Voting Rights Act, to say that you can't have states, the federal government can't treat different states differently. And so it punted back to Congress to say, if you want a Voting Rights Act, you have to come up with either a sort of map that covers every state, or a better analysis for why you need to treat certain states differently. I'm not convinced that that's a bad thing, because what we saw in the 2012 election was that the Southern strategy has moved north.
Exactly.
So we need the Voting Rights Act to apply to states like Pennsylvania and Ohio.
And of course, you're talking about pre-clearance.
Pre-clearance, exactly, before they change any rules. Because that's going to happen immediately. We already see in Texas that the Attorney General there is saying, oh, we're going ahead with our voter ID laws because they want to suppress the Hispanic vote there. But we need the Voting Rights Act, Section 4, to apply to every state in the union. Because the truth of the matter is, the country is becoming a minority-majority nation, but there are still some very, very angry people who have held power for far too long, who are willing to do whatever they need to do in order to change that.
Although kicking it back to Congress doesn't necessarily make me feel particularly comfortable, given how effective
or ineffective
that they have been.
It too, really.
Yes.
Moving on to another big story, this one coming from South Africa. Tribal leaders of Mandela's clan are also getting ready for an adverse turn in their kinsman's health, who is now on life support machines in a Pretoria hospital. Mandela is a Methodist, but tribal rituals would also be observed for someone like Mandela at the end of life. Now, President Obama, remember, is expected to visit Mandela during his visit to Africa, and I understand the president's actually scheduled to arrive in Africa around 4:30 or so this afternoon. There was certainly a lot of debate and question as to whether or not President Obama should visit Nelson Mandela, given his state now.
I believe that he should.
I feel like he should be able to go and pay respects.
Yes.
Nelson Mandela, in the realm of black leaders, is an icon. And if you can go and pay your respects and represent America in that, I'm all for it, because he's amazing. For me, I think the bigger question is what's going to happen to South Africa after he passes, and will the next generation pick up that political torch, or will they be apathetic? I actually linked to a piece on The Root recently about that very subject, and they said that a lot of people, in their 20s and 30s, are not as politically active as their generation before, because they weren't subjected to the stratification. Right? And so they don't necessarily think of it as an issue in a larger sense that they need to fight against.
But I think they've also, just from my reading, I'm not an expert on South African politics, but it appears that that group, that generation that Hillary is talking about, are also a bit disillusioned by the ANC, which is the political party that Mandela was the head of, but which is almost sort of like a massive Democratic Party that has so many different interest groups. And I think that younger South Africans, like Hillary said, who have come up in a post-apartheid era, don't necessarily know where they fit, and they're not politically motivated or politically organized. And that's not a good thing. But I think that there is enough investment there in education and in industry that we will see sort of a talented 10th rise in South Africa that will really make the difference. And I think having Obama go there and become sort of the face of the next generation of African leaders, of the African diaspora, I think is an important thing.
One final story, and I cannot wait to hear what Edward's response is, given what you said just moments before the show. This story about celebrity chef Paula Deen making a very emotional mea culpa on the Today Show this morning. A teary-eyed Paula Deen slammed what she called horrible, horrible lies in an interview with Matt Lauer, responding to critics following allegations of racism. Dean's empire is fading fast after admitting that at least on one occasion she used the N-word. And Edward, when we were discussing this just moments before the show, you said that you actually feel sorry.
Yes.
For Paula.
Yes,
and I'm afraid that you and Hillary, are about to attack me.
I just don't know.
Okay.
Let's hear it.
Well, you know, I was raised partly by my great-grandmother. My other grandmother passed away, so my great-grandmother was sort of the dominant force in my life outside of my parents. And she came from Georgia, which is where Paula Deen is from. And the other side of my family are from North Carolina. So even though I was raised in the North, I have very Southern sensibilities. And I think that this is a cultural issue in the South where, in a lot of ways, Southern whites and Southern blacks are extremely alike. Their politics, in the end, sometimes fall on different lines. But the same food and the same revelry, they have the culture of the place. And so I think in a lot of ways, she's a casualty of her time, because I think she's just an old Southern lady who's a bit naive, maybe even a bit ignorant, to think that the kinds of things that she was saying, and even like the party that she was planning, she wanted the black people in the suits.
I know it was a...
No, but honestly,
there are plenty of old Southern people that know better.
Yes.
That, I think, is the biggest point. I am not at all surprised that an older, wealthy
Southern white woman
from South Georgia is racist and has used the N-word. That's
not necessarily even racist, but has used the N-word.
Has used the N-word and thinks that slavery is an attractive way to throw a party.
Exactly.
That's not what surprises me. What surprises me is that you are in the midst of the Food Network, which is a huge multi-million-dollar,
and you have an international brand.
And you have no one to tell you.
Yes.
Don't say that.
But to be honest with you, that is white America. There's a lot of ignorance that's allowed for them. It's why people like Sarah Palin think that she has any reason to be engaged in our political system. These people are so ignorant sometimes that they don't realize it because the society caters to them.
Right. With Paula Deen, though, she said in one of her many quotes that have come out in the last couple of days, I feel like race relations are pretty good. I feel like we feel the same way as black people.
Because she gets along well with the people in her kitchen.
Well, but the people in her kitchen aren't those the people dependent on the paycheck that she's providing as well. I mean, that's a very different circumstance. I mean, when no one's going to bite the hand that feeds you. I cannot.
But ladies, it's important to understand that this case was brought by a white male.
Right.
Who has, in the course of the deposition, his lawyers have been skillful to gain a whole bunch of information that's not actually relevant to the case in order to force her probably to settle. And so this is not one of her black workers bringing a case of discrimination against her. It's a white male.
Which, quite frankly, is the more disheartening thing.
Well, it depends, because, I mean, I've read enough about this to know that she has never offended anyone in particular, sort of calling someone the N-word. She was asked, had she used it in the course of her life? And to be fair to her, she was actually just honest. That, I think, is a part of both what I would call her naivete and her ignorance. But I think I'm open to the idea that perhaps that ignorance is so intolerable, which I think is what Hillary is basically saying, that I shouldn't have any sort of sensitivity about this. But at the end of the day,
we're going to have to agree to disagree, because I'm sorry, you are not convincing anyone over here.
I just don't think she's a racist. Let me just say this: I don't think she's a racist.
Okay, you said your piece.
Yes.
Paula Deen, you've got support from Edward Wyckoff Williams
and Jesse Jackson,
and that's about it. Anyway, we are on Facebook and Twitter. Follow us on Twitter at Our Take Arise TV, and remember to like and leave comments on our Facebook page at Our Take on Arise TV. You're watching Our Take.
Bigger, stronger, and more domineering than any other. Elephants are the centers of the animal kingdom, but unfortunately today, they're under attack. Tens of thousands are being killed each year just for their ivory. So please support conservation and never buy products made from ivory, because when the buying stops, the killing can too.
Ndingululu Chumsila. Mna ndingumama owasindayo kwi-cancer. I-cancer eyayisisibelekweni. Thina bantu, imistake yethu apha ikhoyo. Kwawuthiwa umuntu une-cancer. Simjongela uba laa mntu ngomso uzosweleka. Andizange ndibe nabunzima kakhulu. Ngoba into ebangela uba nditsho, eyam yabhaqwa msinyane, ngoba into enyanzelekileyo kuba ube nethemba xa kuthiwa unento. Isapoti endayifumanayo kumyeni wam, kubantwana bam, nefemeli yam yonke. Eyona nto ndandinayo mna entliziyweni yam kukuba okusalayo nam ndizophila ndifane nabanye abantu.
Lo myalezo niwuphathelwe yi-JSI and Livestrong Cancer Anti-Stigma Initiative.
I wonder why anyone would do that to themselves. We all need air to breathe, to live, and so does the earth. But we're choking it with plastic bags. Let's stop using plastic bags and give the earth a chance to breathe. Refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle.
And joining me today is Edward Wyckoff Williams, political analyst and contributing editor to The Root. He has written extensively about Trayvon Martin and the case against George Zimmerman, and of course my guest co-host Hillary Crosley.
Clinton.
That's what she was about to say. I was like, wow.
Are you running in 2016?
You know, I was thinking about it.
Well, we were talking a little earlier about Trayvon Martin, and Edward, as you mentioned, you have spoken extensively with Tracy,
yes.
Trayvon's father. You have
and Ben Crump, and I've interviewed the mom.
And you've interviewed the mom. So we saw yesterday these very disturbing images
yes.
of Trayvon's body. We also saw that the father walked out of the courtroom. But what we have also been able to do is listen to George Zimmerman on that fateful night. And I want us to take a listen to it right now, and then we'll chat on the back end.
Mm-hmm.
This guy looks like he's up to no good, or he's on drugs or something. He's got something in his hands. I don't know what his deal is.
Okay, just let me know if he does anything, okay?
Over here.
Yeah, we got him on the way. Just let me know if this guy does anything else.
Okay. They always get away.
Okay, we have several people calling in also.
They always get away. He wasn't talking about a 17-year-old boy.
No.
He was talking about a group of people that he has characterized as other,
you
as
know what?
thugs,
Thank
as don't
you.
belong.
Thank
As dangerous.
You. Yes, yes, and it's criminal. I heard the best analysis of this from a surprising source. Faith Jenkins was on MSNBC with the Rev yesterday, Reverend Al Sharpton, and she said that this is probably the best case for racial profiling, because the prosecution can show that the terms that he used were plural. He only saw one person in the dark, just one person walking. But when he called him, he said, these and these punks, he was grouping them in his mind. And so what was important for the prosecution to get the prior calls is to show that there's a string of evidence that this man had been profiling a group of people. What was that group of people? Young black males. And so on that night, it wasn't that Trayvon out of the dark attacked him. He went and followed him. There's evidence to show that that was the case, and shot and killed a child in the dark.
And we actually heard on the 911 tapes, we heard the dispatcher say,
we don't need you to do
we
that.
don't need you to follow him.
And that's the, not to make light of the situation, but that to me is the funniest part, when they literally say to him, we don't need you to do that. And
yes.
you hear all this wind and all this air, because clearly
and you can tell he's walking.
Anyway, yes,
yes.
following him.
And we also saw in trial testimony, we heard from a woman who was part of the Neighborhood Watch program, the director of, and she testifies that no, we do not encourage our volunteers to approach anyone.
Yes.
I mean, it flies in the face of reason as to why he would do this, if only because he had his own personal agenda.
Yes. Right? And I mean, there's evidence to show that this is a man who wanted to be a police officer. He had failed the test. He had a criminal background. He had been arrested or cited with domestic violence against his ex-girlfriend. There was a restraining order against him on that case. There's also evidence that he was on temazepam and Adderall, which are prescription drugs with serious side effects of insomnia and aggressive behavior and hallucinations. This is not someone you want stalking children in the dark. And that's what occurred, and it had a deadly end. And I think that the more evidence that comes out, the more calls that we hear, what we are going to see is that this is someone who is seriously mentally unstable beyond his racist sensibilities, but the combination of that mental instability with racist sensibilities led to the death of someone's kid.
And you know, it's interesting. Today, when we heard the ruling by Deborah Nelson to allow the 911 tapes, these are, or I should say non-emergency tapes,
right. Yes.
Non-emergency recordings. These were the calls that went to police dispatch in the months prior to the shooting, leading up to the shooting by Zimmerman. That admission of that evidence really does, I think, beyond a shadow of a doubt, show the state of mind of where Zimmerman was coming from.
Something else was really, really key that came out yesterday, that there was no blood on Trayvon's hands and that there was no blood on the concrete. This is what one of the first responders who actually tried to resuscitate Trayvon said. And this was the evidence that I was talking to you about before, because basically the crust of George Zimmerman's story is that he was so violently attacked by this child that he had no other choice but to shoot him dead in the chest. And the fact that there's none of George Zimmerman's DNA under Trayvon's nails, no blood on his hands, and the fact that Trayvon was found face down on the ground flies in the face of this idea that he was face to face with him, fighting him.
Plus, we saw the pictures of Zimmerman's hands as well, right? Nothing to indicate that he was fighting for his life.
Yes.
And I think just as a black person, I have to say, if I was George Zimmerman, I'd be under the jail right now. Like, I think the entire case is such an exercise in patience. I don't know if you guys feel that way. I know that we have to talk about the specifics and the legal ramifications of all of these pieces of evidence that are being provided, but it's just, to me, just from the outset, it's
a prima facie case.
Yeah, I'm like, what are we really talking about here?
But I think what adds insult to injury, though, is the fact that it took over a month for charges to be brought against this man.
Yes.
You know, when Deborah Nelson made her ruling, I made mention of it to Debbie Turner Bell, host of Arise America, and her response was, wow, he might be convicted. And what's interesting about that statement is that it speaks volumes as to what the standard has to be, right? In order for someone like a Zimmerman to be convicted. Because
I'm so glad you said that.
How did he not get charged?
Christina, and this is why what happened in the affirmative action case, I think, is so poignant, because the justices, the white justices on the court, even though obviously Clarence Thomas is their lackey, are acting as if in these 50 years, everything's okay now.
Everything has changed.
Everything has changed.
We are so different.
And there's been so much
White House.
progress. But anytime a black child, an innocent black child with Skittles in his hand, can be treated as a criminal and his murderer set free,
and then we have to talk about it.
And then we have to talk about it. We have to rally. We have to hold signs and wear hoodies and T-shirts.
Bring out LeBron and the whole team.
In order just to get the man to get arrested. Like, there is something deeply wrong in this country. The fault lines of racism are still cracking.
Well, thank you, Edward Wyckoff Williams. I so appreciate your insight, and I know you're going to come back to the show.
I am.
I just know. I'm not going to even ask.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you very much. And you are watching Our Take.
Very reasonable efforts, in my opinion. Enormous.
24 seconds. That's what you get to make it happen. You can run the break, find the big man inside, or swing it out and hit the 3. Grab the board, and you get a new 24, just like that. But unfortunately, for endangered animals, there's no reset. Many are now facing extinction, and when their clock runs out, they're gone forever. So please, support conservation, and never buy products made from these animals. There's no more time to waste.
When was the last time you drank one of these? Last week? Today? Right now? Did you know how much sugar was in that sweetened soda or entire bottle of a sports drink? Read the label next time. In this can of soda, there are 39 grams of sugar. That means 10 sugar packets or 10 teaspoons of sugar. The American Heart Association recommends that preteens and teens don't intentionally add more than 32 grams of sugar, which is 8 sugar packets or 8 teaspoons, to their diets per day. On average, kids ages 8 to 14 consume between 21 and 33 teaspoons of sugar per day. That's 3 or 4 times the limit. Yikes! Choose water, seltzer, milk, or unsweetened tea instead. You can control your sugar intake. Choose what you consume.
I came to Africa to see this. But I also found this. Every year, thousands of elephants are being killed just for their tusk. If we buy ivory, we're just helping the poacher. So please, don't do it. Because when the buying stops, the killing can too.
Many streets throughout Brazil remain packed with protesters. They returned to the streets in smaller, sporadic protests in a handful of Brazilian cities on Tuesday, demanding better education, transport, and health services. The protests came one day, though, after President Dilma Rousseff proposed a wide range of actions to reform Brazil's political system. Journalist and activist in the Black Afro-Brazilian movement, Daniela Gomez, joins us live from Sao Paulo, Brazil. Hi there, Daniela. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Right, Christina. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I hope I can.
Daniela, we have seen these demonstrations grow from a few hundred to tens of thousands to, at its highest point, over 1 million. Clashes with police have resulted in the deaths of 2 women. What did you see?
I think things here in Brazil, it was extremely dangerous at this moment. What I see here, what I can understand, is that the insatisfaction of all those people that are in the street became something that is not on control anymore. It started as a nice protest that could be helpful for the democracy in our country. But at this moment, I think that it's a little bit crazy. It made me a little bit afraid. Several protests are getting another point of view that is not only anymore for rights, but it's also for things that are more dangerous. Some people who are talking about to combat the military dictatorship, some people who are talking about Nazist movement and things like that. It makes me a little bit afraid.
And Daniela, this demonstration did begin with a move to increase bus fare, I understand, 20 cents. But as we've said, it has grown bigger and bigger and bigger. And it does seem to be a nameless, kind of leaderless protest movement. But you talk about that in these demonstrations, there have been calls for military dictatorship. I mean, that seems indicative of clearly bigger, wider problems facing Brazil, is it not?
Yeah, what's happening now is that it started as something that it was right. Of course, when a mayor promised that he should not just price the money for the buses, and he did that, he was lying. So people have the right to protest for that and to say that he's wrong. We have a big issue in this country that it's about the corruption. To be a politician here in Brazil is almost a synonymous of being a corrupt city. And this is sad because people here are a little bit hopeless. They don't know who to vote and who to trust anymore. But what is happening is that after they got their the thing that they were asking for, they didn't give up about to protest, and that lets space for a lot of people use the protest to bring their own agenda.
What exactly is, in your eyes, the larger agenda for these protests? When you say that the success of the bus fare protest led to opening doors for other people to voice their opinions, what are some of the larger themes that you see occurring?
They are asking about everything.
Nothing in particular, though?
Yeah, they are talking against the corruption. They are talking against the president. They are talking against the World Cup. They are talking against the bad system of education and the bad health system here in the country. Of course, all these protests, they are fair. They have a mean to happen. We have a bad education in this country, especially for public education, which is for free here. And most of our people are on that schools, and they don't learn how to read or write. The teachers are receiving less payment that you can imagine. Things are crazy. Also in the health system, we have a public and free health system in the country that it's up for the majority of the country, especially the black majority in the country are using the system, but it's bad. You have people who are dying on hospitals here because of the situation. So all those protests, they are fair. But when they always start to happen at the same time, it became a great situation. All the feelings that were closed like for 20 years or more, because I am 31 years old and I had never seen something like this before in my country. All that feelings that were inside people just came to the street. And this is, in my opinion, of course, this is a little bit dangerous.
And Daniela, you've talked about how these demonstrations have really unleashed massive tensions that were just brewing beneath the surface. But Daniela, you are also an activist and an expert on the African diaspora, specifically Afro-Brazilians. And I'm curious as to whether or not you can paint a picture as to how this most recent demonstration has affected the African-Brazilian population.
We have two kinds of situations here. One, which Afro-Brazilians who are really activists, who are in the middle of the black political movement. So to them, they are on the street, they are protesting too. They are using this space to put their own agenda against races and the black genocide in my country. But on the other hand, we have a majority of black people here who are not involved with political movements, who are not involved with the situation. How can I say that? They are not so conscious about their blackness. And most of those people are not involved in the protests because they need to work. They don't have time to be on the streets like 4 p.m. to protesting. They need to go to the job. If they make a stop for the whole country, they are going to be afraid about to lose their jobs. So we have two different situations here.
Daniela Gomez, thank you so much for joining us from Sao Paulo, Brazil. I understand that you will be coming to the United States to pursue your PhD in African and African diaspora studies. I certainly hope that we'll be able to speak with you again. And again, thank you.
You are welcome. Thank you for this space. I hope I could clarify a little bit. And of course, it will be a pleasure be with you in another moment.
All right. Thanks again, Daniela. And you are watching Our Take.
Basketball, it's a numbers game. But just listen to these numbers.
1 in 3 adults in this country are at risk of developing diabetes.
1 in 3.
Just think about what that looks like in here. Our families,
our friends,
our fans.
Let's change those numbers.
Learn your risk factors for diabetes.
Go to dribble2stopdiabetes.com and take the risk test.
It's fast, free, and easy.
Remember, your health depends on you. To learn more, go to dribble2stopdiabetes.com.
Bigger, stronger, and more domineering than any other. Elephants are the centers of the animal kingdom, but unfortunately today, they're under attack. Tens of thousands are being killed each year just for their ivory. So please support conservation and never buy products made from ivory, because when the buying stops, the killing can too.
Two-thirds of the earth is water. Can you swim?
Our next guest is an Air Force veteran. She was raped while serving her country. And when she tried to seek justice, she discovered that the scales of balance were not tipped in her favor. Colleen Bushnell joins us via Skype from Arizona with her story of survival and her strategy for change. Hi there, Colleen. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Can you hear me? I understand that we do not have Colleen at this moment. We will get back to her in just a few moments. But I do want to now introduce someone else, Michelle Wilmot. Michelle Wilmot is an Army veteran who served in Iraq. Michelle Wilmot joins us from Las Vegas, Nevada via Skype. She is a woman who represents one of the many challenges facing the military right now, which is the role of women in the military, specifically when it comes to combat. Michelle marched side by side all-male Marine infantry units while on patrol in Iraq. And Michelle, thank you for joining us this afternoon. I understand that you spent quite a bit of time in Iraq. You went there to do one thing, but you found yourself in the crosshairs of fire alongside all-male Marine Corps units. Can you give me a sense of what that was like?
Well, in the Army and a lot of other people in other branches like the Marine Corps can relate, we were trained in a way where we were expected to be soldiers. I trained alongside men when I went through basic training or boot camp, advanced individual training, and so on. So I really didn't see any difference at the time. It wasn't treated any different by the Marines that I was working with. So, you know, things that I've seen in movies, things I've been trained for, everything mounted up to that point. And it was stressful, it was difficult, but I did it and I'm on.
Michelle, when you found yourself with these units in Iraq, I understand you, as well as women like you, were defined as lioness. Explain a little bit where that term comes from and exactly what you were doing that, say, for example, other female soldiers were not doing in Iraq.
Well, at the time, this was 2004, 2005, so we had about 4,000 troops on our base, Camp Aramati. and out of 4,000 troops, 30 were female. So when they started Team Lioness was actually formed in 2003. The documentary Lioness is based on that first group. They actually came up with that term just to get women out there and to search women and children for explosives and other weapons. So it was created out of necessity, and it wasn't exactly a political move in any regard. It was just something that was done because we invaded a predominantly Muslim country, and we couldn't have male Marines or soldiers touching, obviously, Iraqi females. So that's where that came from, and they just kind of stuck with that. And even though they were using female soldiers to go out and search women and kids, and to be able to go into houses and perform raids, be at checkpoints, search people, it wasn't too different from any other city that we were doing this in. And the soldiers that remained on base, whether they were male or female, they still had their duties to perform, whether it was something that was a lot more administrative or convoys. So it varied depending on MOS or military occupational specialty.
You talk about being on a base that had 4,000 troops and being one of 30 women. I can't even begin to imagine that, wrap my mind around that. And I should say, for the purpose of full disclosure, I am a military veteran. I was in the Air Force, and I spent 4 years active duty in the military. So I certainly understand what it means to be greatly outnumbered by your male counterparts. Was there ever a question of safety, concern? What were the things that bothered you, not only as a soldier, but as a female soldier?
Well, when we first arrived on the base, we were told by the people that we were basing, which was an all-male team, that we'd probably get a lot of attention, and which we did. It was really strange for a lot of the males that we were surrounded with to see females on the post. But they got used to us, and that was that. And we never really had any issues with it. And I can't speak for other females who may have had issues with it, but for the team that I worked with on Team Lioness, we really didn't have any issues. So when we went out and did these various duties on Team Lioness, the only two questions that we were first asked, my counterpart and I, were one, did we want to be there? And of course, the answer was yes. And two, if we were good with our rifles. And the answer to that was yes. And we were asked no further questions. Now, mind you, we weren't trained on anything in addition to that, except patting somebody down real quick, and they relied on the training that we got in the Army with weapons qualification and other combat and tactical training that we received. So it wasn't anything that was a surprise to me at the time, but I really didn't face any scrutiny about it until I returned to the U.S.
And Michelle, of course, we're having this conversation in part because of the official lifting of the ban of women in combat and the move to at least open a number of, as you say, MOSs, military operational, a number of military jobs to women. Of course, I'm talking about Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, the Air Force pararescuemen. These are all very elite units in the military that are male-dominated. That being said, given the fact that you weren't given the very specialized, needed combat training to do what you were asked to do in Iraq, do you think this move to put women in combat and in these specialized elite units is a step forward? Is it something that if you had the chance to join and do yourself, would you do it?
Well, when I first joined, I had no idea that some of those positions were closed to women. And I remember when I was going through the medic course, they were introducing certain parts of the Special Forces E-Team Delta medic course, which were far more advanced than any regular military medical course that you can take, which is more on an EMT level. And the Special Forces medic role was so advanced and had so much information. And I went through some of the training manuals, and I was thinking to myself, oh, wow, I really wish I could do this or be allowed to do it. And that was a problem, obviously, because that position was closed to me. I really don't think, and I think other military officials can agree with this that are not completely biased, that it all comes down to individual capability. Women have already performed in direct combat operations. We've already proven that, and without the same training that the other combat arms MOSs had. So we still were able to do it without the training, and we also did it without the credit. So Would I go back in and do something like that if I were 17 and could go back in time? Absolutely. I would love the opportunity. It's something that is rigorous for anybody, regardless of gender. And I think the main issue is not necessarily gender itself or capability based on gender, but physical fitness and individual strengths.
All right. Michelle Wilmot joining us live via Skype from Las Vegas. Thank you so very much for sharing your story, and also thank you for your service.
Thank you for your service. Thanks, Christina.
Thanks, Michelle. Now joining us on the phone is Colleen Bushnell from Arizona, a woman who I mentioned a few moments ago is a survivor of military sexual trauma. She is also an advocate for change, an advocate for the way the military currently handles this huge problem of military sexual trauma. Colleen, are you there?
I am. Hi, how are you today?
Hi, Colleen. And again, thank you for joining us today. I understand that you spent about 10 years in the Air Force, and you had intended to spend your entire career in the military, but clearly that changed. Tell me what happened.
Well, in 2003, I was raped by a superior in my office at Lackland Air Force Base. The following year, I was sexually assaulted by our commander, who was a female. Upon my report, she committed suicide. From that point on, I experienced the retaliation and harassment I had feared I would face if I reported the rape in 2003. And ultimately, I was given an errant psychiatric diagnosis, and I was medically retired from the Air Force in 2006.
Colleen, I'm sorry, I don't want to abbreviate your story. We don't have a whole lot of time, but I want you to quickly give me a sense as to what you think should be done, given the volume, the number of cases that clearly military forces have to address with regards to military sexual trauma.
Well, with your first guest, and I do apologize, I don't know her name, and I'm honored to be on this show with her, by the way, a woman who's been on the front lines. What I'm going to say may sound as if it contradicts, but it doesn't. What happens is when a rape or assault happens and it's reported right now, the way it's being handled, overarchingly, is that the individual who reports is actually targeted with retaliation. And they're basically eliminated from the workplace, whether it be, on the front lines or stateside. So oftentimes we'll hear from folks, other women or men, who say that they don't see a problem in the workplace, in the military, with sexual assault. And the reason is because the system works so efficiently to remove anything that hinders the mission, that you don't see that person under normal circumstances after the report is made. Generally, they're either disciplined or they are put in a psychiatric ward, basically, for reacting to having been raped.
And Colleen, I'm sorry, I'm very sorry, Colleen. I'm going to have to cut you off there, but I promise that I want you, and I will make space for you to come back on Our Take and share your story, because as you know, this is not a situation that is going away anytime soon. So again, I do apologize for cutting you off, but Colleen, please know,
thank you.
Please know that you have a place here on Our Take to shed insight and knowledge about this issue. Hillary Crossley, thank you for joining me today. It went by quickly, didn't it?
It did. It was a whirlwind, but it was a great conversation. I'm very thankful for the invitation.
And you too must come back.
I'm here.
All right, okay. I'm Christina Brown, and you are watching Our Take.
"24 seconds. That's what you get to make it happen. You can run the break, find the big man inside, or swing it out and hit the three. Grab the board, and you get a new 24, just like that. But unfortunately, for endangered animals, there's no reset. Many are now facing extinction, and when their clock runs out, they're gone forever. So please, support conservation, and never buy products made from these animals. There's no more time to waste.
I wonder why anyone would do that to themselves. We all need air to breathe, to live, and so does the earth. But we're choking it with plastic bags. Let's stop using plastic bags and give the earth a chance to breathe. Refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle.
Two-thirds of the Earth is water. Can you swim?
It is time now to go from our take to your take. We want to hear from you and see what you've been up to online. And here is what some of our Twitter friends have already been tweeting. This one comes from Deepak Chopra. Enjoyed my interview with Brown Christina. That's my Twitter handle. Brown Christina, get it? On Our Take Arise TV, discussing his book, Brotherhood. We loved having you, Deepak. You must come back. Another tweet, this one coming from Hamilton Hayes, 18, saying the Food Channel was right not to continue to give someone who thinks that way toward Afro-Americans a voice. And of course, that is in response to our coverage of Paula Deen and her apology today on the Today Show after making a racial slur. But before we leave you today, I must show you some very enjoyable video coming from Brazil. Not all things are terrible in Brazil. This Our World video is a little dance samba music. It's from Rio de Janeiro's annual samba parade, a 4-day celebration, a giant competition featuring 70 samba schools. Let's listen in and take a look. And thank you so much for watching Arise Our Take. Of course, I will see you online until we meet again on air for tomorrow's Our Take.
All right,